times during COVID, when we're all sitting at home, it's sort of like a ray of light that we get to watch these amazing sessions when we can't all be together. It certainly brightens up my evenings.
आज पेंडेमिक में हम डिजिटली लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल कर रहे हैं और मुझे लगता है कि हमारे सामने श्रोता नहीं है, हम आपस में बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उस फील को, उस उमंग को महसूस कर सकते हैं कि हजारों लाखों लोग हमसे जुड़े हुए हैं, हमको सुन रहे हैं और कहीं ना कहीं कोई एक सार्थक हस्तक्षेप हो रहा है.
People who came online to view and listen to our incredible speakers from across the world, we were able to continue in our tradition of ensuring the free flow of knowledge and information.
On behalf of festival co-directors Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, I welcome you back to the new season of the Jaipur Literature Festival Online Sessions 2021. Given the second wave that has been at the heart of so much pain and suffering, we wish to continue with our vision to ensure the free flow of knowledge and information to address so many vital questions of our times through this digital series. Our session today is Born a Muslim, the Population Myth, S.Y. Quraishi and Ghazala Wahab in conversation with Pragya Tiwari. Presenting a compelling and detailed account of the Muslim community in India, S.Y. Quraishi and Ghazala Wahab unravel the politicization of their fate from two different frontiers. S.Y. Quraishi's latest book, The Population Myth, Islam, Family Planning and Politics in India, critically analyzes the attempts at stoking majoritarian fear around the supposed exponential growth of the Muslim population. Based on impeccable research of the Quran and the Hadith, the book highlights that Islam is one of the first religions in the world to advocate smaller families. Ghazala Wahab's latest book, Born a Muslim, Some Truths About Islam in India, follows the evolution of Islam through the region while delving into the reasons behind the staggered socio-economic and intellectual growth of Indian Muslims. Weaving together personal memoir, history, reportage, and scholarship, the book unravels the stigma around the community and the roots of their vulnerability and insecurity. In conversation with writer and columnist Pragya Tiwari, they present an eye-opening account of one of the most diverse communities in India. S.Y. Quraishi joined the Indian Administrative Service in 1971 and rose to become the 17th Chief Election Commissioner of India. He introduced a number of electoral reforms such as the creation of a voter education division, expenditure monitoring division, the India International Institute of Democracy and Election Management, and launched National Voters' Day. He's also the author of the best-selling book, An Undocumented Wonder, The Making of the Great Indian Election. Ghazala Wahab started Force in August 2003 along with Praveen Sahani. She's the co-author of Dragon on Our Doorstep, Managing China Through Military Power, and author of Born a Muslim, Some Truths About Islam in India. Apart from writing on issues like homeland security, terrorism, Jammu and Kashmir, left-wing extremism, and religious extremism, Wahab is responsible for the overall production of the magazine every month. Pragya Tiwari is a journalist who's written extensively on politics, identity, policy, and culture, and edited publications such as The Helka, The Big Indian Picture, and Vice. She currently works as a policy and culture consultant. She's the co-founder and editor of the Indian History Collective. All our sessions that have been broadcast till now have been archived and are available on our website in the Mughal Tent venue. You can also watch them on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Please note that you are welcome to ask questions and comment by typing it in the comment section. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present Born a Muslim, the Population Myth, S.Y. Quraishi and Ghazala Wahab in conversation with Pragya Tiwari. Over to you, Pragya.
Thank you, Kritika, and thank you, Jaipur Literature Festival. It's always a pleasure to be on this platform, but this particular session is important because of the reason that the last couple of months, last 1.5 months in particular, have been very difficult for this country, have been very difficult for all of us, have been very difficult for me personally, as well as my family was afflicted by the virus as well. But because I was to do this session, I was sent these two books and I read them. And it was probably the single most source of joy in my life while I was reading them. Now, joy is a strange word to associate with complicated, complex books like these, but the joy for someone like me who's been a reporter, a writer, is in just seeing complicated subjects like these being picked up and writers doing such fabulous justice to it. So without further ado, I want to jump straight into the conversation so you can also kind of, if you haven't read the books yet, get a slice of why I am telling you about how wonderful they are. And I will start with you, Ghazala. It's kind of a little bit daunting to, I don't even know, the book is just, there's so much in that book. I don't even know whether I'll be able to do any kind of justice in, to the book in the next 40 odd minutes. But I do want to start by asking you, in the introduction to the book, it's a longish introduction and it's a beautifully written introduction because it really is truly an introduction to you, to your earliest memories, to us being able to sort of piece together with you your awareness of your identity as a Muslim. But there is one particular incident perhaps that stands out, perhaps because of how disturbing it is in the book, in that introduction. And this is about when you were a teenager, I think 18 or 19 years old, I cannot remember very clearly, and you witnessed in your hometown in Agra a communal riot, what is always called a communal riot in media. And then you go on to describe the incident, but also sort of to poignantly sort of etch out the psychological fallouts of this particular incident in your family, within your family, how it made you sort of aware of a slight friction between your identity as a Muslim and as an Indian. The sense that privilege and being part of the mainstream doesn't always insulate a Muslim family from the horrors that are routinely visited upon Muslims, and perhaps most heartbreakingly, the confidence of your father in belonging to this country. I would really like it if you spoke a little bit about this incident and the legacy of this incident where your family is concerned, because I really feel like it sets the book up so well.
Thank you, Pragya, so much. Thank you, Jaipur Literary Festival, for this opportunity. Before I just talk about this incident, I have mentioned this in the book also. Agra has never been associated with communal violence. So when this incident, or when the riots broke out in 1990, they took everybody by surprise because it had a history of caste violence, upper caste and low caste violence, but never a Hindu and Muslim violence. Probably because of the history of the city, probably because of the Mughal heritage, the cultural heritage, because there was so much of cultural activity prior to 1990, which used to happen in Agra. It was a center of the mushairas and kavi sammelans, and IPTA had a very strong foothold in Agra. So all of that. This violence was preceded by a series of visits, high-level visits by the right-wing leadership, including the BHP leadership. And all through 1990, I had attended one such meeting where BP Singhal, who had retired as Director General Police, UP, was addressing the meeting, and he had spoken such frightening things, and such vituperative speeches were being made at this function. So there was a leading up to what was happening. I mean, even before the Advani's Rath Yatra began. Now, when this happened, despite the fact that the violence began a few days before the attack on my family, we were kind of sanguine in the knowledge that because we lived in an area which is more privileged, Hindu-dominated area, that we were the only Muslim family there. We have connections, we know people, and my father was so well known, not only as a successful businessman, but also as a philanthropist. So we were secure. Nothing really would happen to us because usually riots or violence affect poor. So when this happened, despite the fact that our neighbors were warning us, probably my father never took it very seriously, which is why we made no arrangements of security, though he did book us in a hotel, and my mother drove us to the hotel, the 5-star hotel, but we came back because we generally felt that nothing really would happen and we are maybe overreacting. So when this happened, it was sort of a shock and a betrayal at multiple levels. It was a shock because it was so unexpected. Despite the warnings by our neighbors, we didn't think it would happen. And it was betrayal because we thought this money, the social standing, my father's philanthropy, his successful business, national awards, and everything put together, he was in a different sort of a league. He was not like a ordinary Muslim. I'm sorry, sounding like this, but that is how his mental makeup was at that point. So when this happened, it was really disillusioning at so many levels. And because we were young, we grew up, we moved out of Agra, moved on in life, and this was a very distant memory for me. But the fact that this is not a distant memory for my father has been brought home to me in the last few years, especially after 2014, when some sort of anxiety has, once again taken a grip over the Muslim population. And again, irrespective of your economic background, though the violence that we have seen, targeted violence in the last few years, the victims have been poor, but the not so poor people have been affected economically, they've been affected psychologically. And I feel what is worse, or what really impacts on you the most, is when there is an assault on your what you think is your self-worth. You kind of build a status in your mind. You think that you are this sort of a person, or this is how the world regards you. And when there is an assault on that, and you are made to feel or fear like any other person, that is the most debilitating emotion. And I think that is what has happened in my father's case, that last year he was the most enthusiastic in our family to step out of the house and on the porch with the thali and the ladle, and he was banging it and waving to the neighbors, saying, in a gesture of showing them that, look, I'm also doing this. And standing in the balcony with his mobile. So I didn't do all this because I felt no desire to do it, and I didn't feel that there was a compulsion for me to do it. Though I live in a place where, again, upmarket, upscale, gated society, and everybody was doing it, but I was happy just sitting inside my house and not getting bothered about showing my neighbors that I'm doing this. But he felt that it was important that not only he does this, my mother also stands next to him, and my younger brother who lives with him, his family, they all, they should be visible to everybody that they're doing this. So this is the legacy, I think, which I have realized now.
You're so beautifully summed up the sort of tragic comedy of how these absolutely inane bits of propaganda, now our sense of identity, love for nation, all of that has been sort of tagged on to these completely inane acts, which are essentially just meant to drive political propaganda in the favor of one party or another. But speaking of propaganda, sir, I wanted to come to you, Quraishi sir. There are several myths. Firstly, I have to say that, I loved Ghazala's book, but it's the sort of book that's, it's part memoir, it's part reportage. It's just that perfect book. But, to do what you've done with a book that seemingly, you know, people wouldn't pick up a book about India's population and the history of, you know, India's minority population, etc. But you've done such a wonderful job that it's almost like a page turner, you know, which no one expects from a scholarly and academic, you know, exercise such as yours. But you know, there's several myths that you deal with in your book with respect to India's population, but central amongst them are the sort of canards that are kind of spread about the Muslim population in India. We'll come down the line to why it is precisely that a canard and, you know, myths. We'll come to the facts that refute these myths. But before we do that, I want you to just give us a sense of what are the contours of this myth, you know, because it's sort of very smoke and mirrors. How it's often deployed and what made you want to address it.
Yeah, you know, the Pragya, this book started almost by accident in 1995, or was it 94? Country director of UNFPA, who was a Canadian, white Canadian, with whom I had worked for a couple of days. After 6 months, he came to me and he said, Quraishi, we would like you to write a strategy paper for the Muslims' family planning practices. I said, look, I was surprised because I'm neither an Islamic scholar nor had I ever worked in family planning department. But he persisted and offered me a very good money also, which was 20 times my then salary for just 1 month. So somehow after his great persuasion, when I agreed to write, I said, one condition that I'll do it pro bono. He was taken aback. He said, people come to us demanding money and here you say pro bono and we don't take anything free. No, you have to charge. And we agreed on a royalty amount of 1 rupee. Now, after that, even I did not know what I'm going to write. Once that was settled, then when I started thinking and doing research about it, then I realized that I was also suffering from some of those myths. And what are those myths? It is important to recount them. There are basically 5 which I have dealt with. That Muslims produce too many children and they are responsible for population explosion. 2, that this the birth rate is disturbing demographic balance of the country. And thirdly, it is an organized conspiracy by the Muslims to overtake the Hindus. And the 4th allegation and the myth was that the Muslims used polygamy to increase their population. And finally, there was a myth that Islam is against family planning. And this myth was common to Muslims and Hindus both. And I must admit that even I thought that was the case. But when I started researching, I found the facts and figures were eye-opening. Now, Muslims produce too many children and responsible for population explosion. You would get the impression that the difference between a Hindu family and a Muslim family will be about 8 or 10 children. If Hindus had 2 children, Muslims will have 10. If Hindus had 3, Muslims will have 11. That would be the impression. But I have shown you through the book that at no point in time, the difference between Hindus and Muslims was more than 1 child. Actually, 1.1 to be precise. And that too, because Muslims are accepting family planning faster than the Hindus, that gap has come down from 1.1 to 0.48. Muslims are catching up very fast. So therefore, to say that they are responsible for population explosion is wrong. Now, if Muslims have the highest birth rate, then let us remember who has the 2nd highest birth rate? The Hindus. So therefore, they also cannot escape their responsibility and their numbers are larger. In fact, in 1951, the gap between Hindus and Muslims was 30 crores. Now it is 80 crores. Now, who is responsible for population explosion? Now, second allegation that the demographic balance is getting disturbed. To a certain extent, it is true that in 60 years, from 84%, Hindus came down to 79.8%. And this 4.2 was distributed over all communities, particularly the Muslims, who went up from 9.8 to 14.2. Now, 4 percentage point increase in 60 years. Now, if we want to become 51%, we have to wait 600 years, provided the same rate continues, which is not continuing because Muslims, as I told you, are catching up faster. Now, polygamy. There are 3-4 myths within this myth. One, that in India, polygamy is statistically just not possible. because gender ratio is adverse against women. For 1,000 men, last year there were only 924 women. Now, suppose I want to go looking for my second wife, she is not available because every single man in India hasn't got one full wife. In fact, statistically, it is 0.9 wife which everybody has. It may sound like a joke, but statistically is the most correct statement. Right. Secondly, what does Islam say? That is where Muslims also suffer from the myth that Islam allows polygamy. Well, Islam, there is only one verse in the Quran which permits polygamy, but conditionally. And that condition is that it should be absolute equality between your first wife and the second. Now, the context, even the Muslims and the ulama, what they forget is the context. This verse in the Quran, the only verse in the Quran, as I mentioned, came in the context of the orphans and the widows. When the Quran is saying that treat the orphans fairly, do not misappropriate their property, do not replace their good thing with your bad thing, and best will be that from among them, marry 2, 3, or 4. Now, when I'm looking for my second wife, I'm looking for a virgin. Now, that's whereas the implication of this verse was that look at the widows, because widows needed protection. That was the kind. So that is the first condition, and the second is equality. So, and finally, whether Islam is against family planning, we have proof from the book that Islam not only is not against family planning, Islam surprisingly is the pioneer of the concept. 1400 years ago, when there was no population pressure anywhere in the world, there is a verse in the Quran that, oh young men, those of you who have financial means should get married because it will keep you away from promiscuity. Now, one young man went to the Prophet seeking an explanation. He said, look, I am a poor man. Allah says that I should marry only when I have the financial means. I'm poor, but I have my sexual needs. What should I do? So Prophet repeated that verse and said, till you are in a position to marry, you should resort to fasting because that suppresses sexual desires. And I'll conclude by one more hadith, which to my mind clinches the argument. One person who had many children went to the Prophet and said, I have many children, I don't want any more, and I want to practice coitus interruptus, which in Arabic was al-azl, or withdrawal method. So, but he said, I want to do that, but a Jew was saying that this is a minor infanticide. The Prophet said, no, the Jew is wrong, Jew lied, which means this method is fine, go ahead. Even the method is approved. So what more proof do we need to show that Islam actually approves of family planning? And in fact, just one more final word, that nowhere in the Quran family planning has been prohibited. Whereas whatever has been prohibited, Allah says in one ayah that whatever we wanted to prohibit for you, we have explained to you in detail. And he has said nothing about family planning, so which means family planning is definitely very permissible in Islam.
You know, one of the many things that's sort of great about both your books, and perhaps this is common to both your books, is that on the one hand, you talk about the sort of various kinds of injustices that the Muslim community faces in this country, but you also kind of look within the community and talk about things that need to change within the community as well, right? And what you just said, sir, there's a lot to unpack there, and hopefully we will in the rest of the conversation, but I want to kind of hold on to you talking about two things, which is one was polygamy and the other was family planning. And in fact, something that you write about and you perhaps forgot to mention because you were going through it very quickly, is that even polygamy is something that we have just been conditioned to, associate with the Muslim population, and the Muslim community, but it actually is prevalent, in all kinds of communities in the country. And when there was a study done that you talk about, which I didn't know about, until I listened to you and read your book, etc., that it showed that in fact the Muslim community was lowest in the country at that point in time when it came to polygamy. But nonetheless, there are sort of misunderstandings in terms of what it means, what polygamy means, and what family planning, what the scriptures say about family planning, even within the Muslim community. And to a large extent, perhaps this can be explained by something that Ghazala writes about. You write about the sort of grip, that pincer grip on the community. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And particularly, of course, you talk about this with respect to socially and economically marginalized Muslims. But could you talk a little bit about the role that the state, ill-advised and sometimes purely malicious laws and policies, and the sort of religious figureheads within the community, the different kinds of roles that these entities play to keep the community in that sort of grip?
Well, I also did a little bit of primary.
Sorry, sir. This question was for Ghazala, but of course you can also.
Oh, you can also. Sorry, Ghazala. Please carry on.
No, that's okay. There are two aspects to this. One is the policies, which are deliberately, or the way they are framed, they kind of exclude the interests of the Muslim community. So they are exclusionary in that sense. But the other thing, which is even more damaging, is the marshalling of public opinion. When you deliberately spread qanaats, or as Dr. Quraishi mentioned, the myths, if you deliberately spread rumors about a community, then you are whipping up the public sentiment against them. So what we have witnessed over a period of time, during various communal violence, whenever an incident happened, this hatred against the community, maybe the violence is orchestrated to a certain extent, but the fact that so many people actually come out and vent their hatred on unarmed women and children and people, poor and elderly men who are helpless, unable to fight back, it shows that the hatred is so deep-rooted, or it has been made so deep-rooted that you don't even pause to think why you're doing this, or why you are attacking somebody. So this whipping of sentiments or hatred is one of the most damaging things that has happened after partition. And here, they kind of nuanced the narrative against the Muslims, the right-wing ideologues. They nuanced it in the manner that earlier they were the people who had demanded partition, and they've got their Pakistan, they're still staying here, and they're expecting government to pamper them, do things for Muslim benefits. And the government is also favoring the Muslims over the Hindus. So this was the first sort of a narrative they built. Then the narrative was that they cannot be trusted. They're fifth columnists, they're working for Pakistan. Look at them, they're cheering the Pakistan cricket team during a match. Then this whole population racket that Muslims will overtake Hindus and India will become a Muslim country, and we want, you will be now governed by Sharia. Then terrorism, so all of this, and now we see love jihad. None of this has any basis in reality, and people, if they just pause and think, they'll realize that it's all stupidity, it's all rumors. But this is one part of excluding the Muslims from the mainstream, because obviously this creates such a fear psychosis that the Muslims do not really want to be seen or want to be visible in the mainstream. They want to stick to their own because they seek security in numbers. This is one part. The other part is the policies, the deliberate policies. Immediately after partition, there was a policy of excluding the Muslims from certain kind of government jobs, which were deemed too sensitive for a Muslim to be trusted with that. Subsequently, in the public sector, government public sector undertakings, there was a policy that keep them out of sensitive areas, keep them out of higher or more responsible positions. I have quoted some study by the Economic Times that even in the private sector, this prejudice is so deep-rooted that a person, a Muslim in the same position as a non-Muslim, draws less salary because his capacity to negotiate a better package is poorer than a non-Muslim. So all of this then keeps the Muslim community by and large on the margins. The other prong of this pincer has been this preponderance or over dependence on the ulama, and that again comes when you are unhappy or you are miserable, you're financially weak, or you are vulnerable, that you seek succor and repeated succor in religion and anybody else who promises you some sort of support or some sort of comfort. So this dependence increased proportionately to their exclusion from the mainstream. Anybody who's, even across communities, a person who's wealthy or who's secure in his or her position tends to be less religious or less in the grip of religious people, whether they're Muslims or Hindus or Christians, which is why the West, the newer generation in the West, they're getting away from religion as opposed to our population. So these two, they kind of hold the community back, because for smallest thing, you consulting a ulama, if you want to start a business, you immediately go to a Maulvi and you say, is this halal or haram? Can I do this? I have quoted instances of people seeking fatwas on even traveling. That can I travel in a Kingfisher aircraft because the owner of the Kingfisher also has a liquor business. I mean, these are complete nonsensical questions, and only somebody who's extremely insecure would ask these questions. So this is the other part.
It's really interesting you say this, and it just bloody doesn't go away, right? Like you talked about in the book, you write about more policies, that are so prejudicial, whether deliberately or as just misguided, whatever they might be. And even so, despite these policies, despite the damning Sachar Committee report, this idea and this narrative persists that, Muslims are pampered in this country. I mean, the Sachar Committee report clearly shows that economically they are likely to be more disenfranchised than the SC/ST communities in this country. And of course, there are SC/ST communities within, the Muslim community as well. But even then, this thing doesn't go away, right? Like they've been pampered by the state, they've been pampered by the state. But sir, I want to come to you, Quraishi sir, for a minute while we're talking about economic disenfranchisement. Because, not only does your book talk about why the sort of Muslim population myths are just that, myths, you also explain the other factors that we can use as lenses to understand the facts and figures that you present, right? Like, for example, one of the facts is that most states, majority of states in India today are in fact below replacement rate, right? So worrying about any population, overtaking any population is absurd. And that can be correlated with whether states are poor or not poor. Or when we look at where the birth rate is the highest, they tend to be states that are poorer. And it's not about how much the Muslim population is in that particular state. So can you talk about the role economic disenfranchisement plays in keeping the Muslim community where it's at, and also perhaps explaining some of the facts and figures that are misappropriated and misused when it comes to the community?
First of all, there is no Hindu rate of growth or the Muslim rate of growth. As I've indicated from the book, there are 22 states in the country where the Muslim rate of growth, the total fertility rate of the Muslims, 22 states, is lower than of the Hindus in Bihar. Now, if religion was a factor, all over the country, Muslims will be producing too many children, but that's not the case. And secondly, as you said, that majority of the states, now 24 out of 29 have already reached below the replacement level of 2.1. So to that extent, family planning policy in India has been a great success in very low key. They have been doing a good job, and we are almost there. So now when I say there is no Hindu-Muslim rate of TFR, if you see the range for the Muslims, it is as low as 1.74 in Tamil Nadu and 4.11 in Bihar, and so many in between. So what is the Muslim rate? We don't know. Similarly, the Hindu range, in Kerala it is 1.42, in Bihar it is 3.29. So since the range across the states is so different, so therefore we have to look for some other factors. It is not religion. Now, what are the factors? The socio-economic factors are actually the determinant of fertility behavior, particularly three. Literacy, particularly of girls. As the literacy goes up, number of children goes down across the board. As the income goes up, the number of children goes down. When the service delivery goes up, the number of children goes down. And then I have examined in one chapter, where do Muslims stand in these socio-economic determinants? They are most backward in all of them. Now, if we want them to do family planning, we have to talk of their education. But have you heard the right wing ever talking about the Muslim education? When they should be talking about increasing their prosperity, what instead we hear is, then do not do any business with them. Don't buy vegetable from the Muslim vegetable seller. If you don't buy that, he will become poorer and he will produce more children. Be warned. Now, what is this? And similarly, the doctors and paramedics do not like to get posted in Muslim area. These clusters which are increasing, they are defined, or they are described as mini Pakistan, and very contemptuously. So nobody wants to go there. If services will not go, how will family planning happen? So therefore, we have to look at the facts on the ground, and otherwise we will be barking up a wrong tree. If we want to solve the problem, we have to understand the problem in all honesty. So now, one point I have raised, whether these guys are who are spreading all these lies, are they ignorant or they are deliberately, mischievously doing it? And I have come to the conclusion that most of them cannot be ignorant, because these RSS and these right-wing organizations are highly educated people. They have their research wings and a whole lot of research wings, and they do a lot of study. So to think that they do not know. Now, if a very top leader of the country is saying, "Hum 5, hamare 25, hum 4, hamare 40." So is he saying it out of ignorance? So if he is ignorant, his ignorance has to be addressed. And if he is doing out of mischief, it has to be addressed as well.
You again brought up a bunch of things, and we don't have much time, but I will try and pick up on a couple of those things and take it to both of you. One is, you talked about, while we're still staying on this issue of economic disenfranchisement, you mentioned this kind of economic boycott of Muslims, calls to not use, buy vegetables from them or go to their shops, etc. Obviously will only worsen the situation. But there is another thing that I want to kind of talk about, which has been very, very rampant, and which is both this sort of formal and informal kind of crackdowns on cattle trading or alleged cow smuggling, or, the various forms that it ends up taking. And I think a very good case in point is, I don't know how many people are following the story, but I feel like everybody should be, what's going on in Lakshadweep right now. Right? It's like unfolding as we have this conversation. I want to get a sense from both of you that, these sort of contradictions, and there's a second contradiction that I will again bring in, that on the one hand, there is this kind of propaganda that, Muslims must not produce as many children, and, Muslims mustn't do this and X and Y and Z. But obviously it is important to understand that that's linked to economic prosperity. But the other thing that is also linked to is, women empowerment, right? And the only time that the BJP talks about women empowerment is, of course, UCC. And outside of that, nothing else exists. So both these are sort of very complicated questions. One, not so much, which is the cattle trade question. And the second is, of course, UCC. So I'd like to get both your thoughts on that very, very quickly. So perhaps we can start with you and then go to Ghazala.
Oh, first me. Well, the myths are deliberate, and at their root cause of all the hostility between communities. And I personally feel that it is part of a larger script. whatever is happening, they are not isolated events. They are all part of a script, whether it is Lakshadweep or cow lynching on this cow slaughter issue or love jihad. They are deliberate because it is so easy, so easy to create a communal riot. And every communal riot, a small or big, make two children fight and the riot follows. It is helping somebody politically. And tested and tried method of winning elections. Therefore, they want to keep the pot boiling all the time. So that is the reason why this is a part of a very thought out, very deliberate, mischievous strategy, and which is paying dividends. And nobody has taken the bull by the horn. Nobody has confronted them with the myths and untruths and lies which they have been indulging in. And in fact, I'm quite surprised, pleasantly and surprisingly, that till for the last 3-4 months since my book came out, I've not had an agitation outside my door, or there is no hostile reaction to my book, because all that I have mentioned are facts. All the kind of discourse which we have seen that Hindus should produce 10 children, these are all quoted in the one chapter. What they're saying, the kind of venomous discourse, it's all there. So now I have not come across the counter as yet, and I look forward to hearing something from them.
Like you said, obviously this is perhaps, like you said, a carefully scripted narrative. But even so, when we think about, this sort of the conversation around vegetarian, non-vegetarian, cow protection, etc., we always think of lynchings first things. But, it's not just the lynchings. I mean, they're bad enough, but it's also the economic repercussions. And Ghazala, if you'd like to quickly give us a sense of how that plays out, particularly because you're from Agra, where, leather trade was always burgeoning and a very, very big thing.
Spreading rumors for the sake of creating communal situation is, again, I would say, one part of it. The other is to set in motion some sort of economic degradation of the community, because Muslims are preponderantly, especially in southern parts of the country, not just in North India, but even West Bengal and Tamil Nadu. Muslims are preponderantly dependent upon trade pertaining to cattle, whether it's meat or it's the byproducts of cattle, like leather. So if you create a vicious atmosphere around this business, then a lot of Muslims would be forced to either shut down their businesses or sell them. I have seen both of these happening. There has been a huge exodus of leather traders, tannery owners and leather tanneries from UP to West Bengal. And similarly, a lot of Muslims who were into the meat processing business, and these are those ancillary units, they supply to big exporters. A lot of them have sold their businesses, and they have been compelled to sell their business, because it's the same business, same meat, including beef and buffalo meat, is being sold or handled by a non-Muslim. Nobody would raise an eyebrow, but if it's a Muslim, then any kind of meat, even lamb meat or even the goat meat, is looked upon with suspicion. And we have seen cases, and for a message to be sent to the Muslims, all you need is one lynching. As we saw the first incident of Akhlaq in my neighborhood, right here next to where I live in Noida. The police, by filing the case against the family to verify the meat, the message was being sent that whatever it is, whichever meat it is, law may take its course, but the immediate justice would be meted out by the mob. And the mob is no longer faceless, which is what makes it even more frightening, because now you can't say that, I don't know, it was a big crowd. Now you know who exactly is part of the mob. People who are part of the mob now own up to being part of the mob. They make videos, they post it on social media. Politicians accept them or garland them. So now it's no longer a faceless mob. So the message that is being communicated is of, it's a very deliberate message that these are the things where you will be targeted. So if you have to protect yourself, your life, your livelihood, find something else to do. Then a community which is not doing anything, where the education level is so poor, most of them are self-employed in family trade. For them to make the switch is not easy. People who have sold their family businesses actually are now sitting idle, because for them, they can't switch to something else, and they cannot get jobs because they're not qualified for a job. So that is the economic aspect. You want me to answer the UCC?
Yes, very quickly before we'll have to close at this question, but I would really like you, because you write about it, I think just you help people make sense of that debate in a very sort of poignant way.
See, I think this whole UCC debate, like everything else, is based on a lot of falsehoods. Now, if Muslim women are not happy, or majority of Muslim women are not happy under the Muslim personal law, which in any case impacts very small part of their lives. So this demand, unless it comes from the Muslim women, this will not be accepted. As we saw in the Shabano case, she declined the amount which was given to her by the Supreme Court, because she suddenly realized that she can't go against the religion. So this grip of the religion is so strong that unless they themselves feel that they need to raise their voice and they need to have better rights for themselves, this UCC argument will not go anywhere. Even if the government forces or ramps down the UCC law over, on the Muslim community, the Muslims are not the only people who are resisting it. There are a lot of other communities also who are resisting it. So even if this law is forced down them, they'll just become even more invisible. I mean, how will the long arm of law catch a Muslim man if he doesn't give maintenance to the wife, or if he just gives some maintenance for the period of that 3 months that she has to sit out? So how will this law be enforced if people do not accept the law, if people do not want this law to be implemented or to interfere in what they think is their religious law? So I think this debate or this whole argument of UCC right now is raised either by feminists, rightly so, and by the right wing. Unless it comes from the Muslims themselves, this really cannot go very far.
And of course, that brings us back to, this will come from the, Muslim community. When women have more education, women have, greater economic independence. So it brings us that there's that circularity of argument. And plus, of course, when women feel like this is a position that is aligned with those very people who are seen as against the community, it makes it more difficult for them to accept those laws. So that's sort of the complication, but we have to wrap. I will ask Sir if he has any concluding comments to make before we call it a day.
Can I go first?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say that, Muslims are nearly 15% of the population. It's not a small number. I mean, 15 sounds small when you're looking at percentage, but in sheer numbers, it's a huge number. And we have a history of interdependence. We have a history of coexistence. If you read old literature, especially from the Northern Belt, you'll realize that the relationship between the Hindus and the Muslims in the small towns of India, in the rural areas, was very organic. The economic and social interdependence was so deep-rooted that even in this atmosphere of absolute hatred, whenever there is violence, you need a very strong trigger, and you actually need the police to stand by the mob for the violence to be seen through, because people still have some sort of probably old values left. So for the country to progress, for any community to progress, it has to be a collective effort. They have to move together. So if we think in terms of uplift of the Muslim community, if we talk of how Muslims can, improve their lot, they cannot do it on their own. They have to do it along with others. And if we think of India progressing, then it cannot progress if a huge chunk of its population remains like this in shackles, impoverished, poor. It will just pull the country back.
Very well said. And for those of you who are listening, I should remind you that part of what Ghazala's book is, in fact, this sort of abridged history of Islam in India, which talks a little bit more about the sort of syncretism that she was talking about, the give and take that's existed in India between all kinds of communities, not just Hindus and Muslims as we understand them today. Sir, any concluding remarks?
Yeah, quick. The impression from the discussion so far would be that this is a Hindu versus Muslim issue. I have mentioned very clearly in the book that actually it is not Hindu versus Muslim. Hindus and Muslims are actually on the same end of the spectrum. If Muslims are the most backward, they have the highest fertility. The Hindus are equally backward, a little less backward, and they have the second highest fertility. Therefore, they are on the same end of the spectrum, and we have to deal with all these issues, which are the core determinants of fertility behavior, which is the three factors which I mentioned, which also lead to other factors like delayed age of marriage, which delays pregnancy and the number of children, and higher education means women's employment, which means delayed marriage again. So there is an interplay of factors which we need to look at that, and the two communities should work together. And finally, my book ends in an appeal to the Muslims that do not fall victim to a procreation war. Whatever they may be saying that Hindus should produce more children, Muslims should adopt family planning proactively and have given a complete communication strategy how to promote family planning among the Muslims.
Let's hope, sir. Hindus, Muslims, everybody in this country and beyond is listening to your words and Ghazala's. And I would again urge all of you to please buy the books and read them. Trust me, this is not even a sliver of what the books cover. This is just, not even really a taste. This is just the smell of it. So please go ahead, buy the book. Thank you very much, Ghazala. Thank you, sir, for speaking with me. Over to you, Pragya.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Quraishi. Thank you, Ghazala and Pragya, for that fabulously interesting and informative session. Thank you for sharing your perspectives on this. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. The grave repercussions of COVID-19 have set us back in ways that we could have never imagined. In our efforts to rebuild the devastating impact suffered by the arts sector, Teamwork Arts launched Art Matters in 2020. Through which we've been working towards creating awareness about the current reality of artists across India affected by the pandemic and developing support channels for them. Our efforts helped raise over 7.5 million rupees, and over the past year, we, in collaboration with our partner NGOs, were able to help over 5,200 artists and craftspeople in need across the country. With the onset of this virulent second wave, we again face unprecedented and heartbreaking challenges. We've launched an emergency fund to provide them with a range of resources from food and rations to healthcare and medicines. You can contribute by pressing the contribute button on the left or right side of your screen. We hope to see you next Friday on 4th of June when we begin our new series, JLF First Edition Book Launches. This series will unveil new important books of our times. The first session of our series will be The Spirit of Inquiry, Dissent as an Art Form, T.M. Krishna in conversation with Gopal Krishna Gandhi. You can watch this on Friday, 4th June at 7 p.m. IST. This will be followed by a Jaipur Literature Festival online series session, Finding the Raga, and improvisation on Indian music, Amit Chaudhary in conversation with Catherine Butler-Shawfield at 8:30 p.m. IST. On behalf of all of us, stay safe, stay double-masked, and we look forward to seeing you next Friday with new sessions. Good night.
In these times during COVID, when we're all sitting at home, it's sort of like a ray of light that we get to watch these amazing sessions when we can't all be together. It certainly brightens up my evenings.
आज पेंडेमिक में हम डिजिटली लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल कर रहे हैं और मुझे लगता है कि हमारे सामने श्रोता नहीं है, हम आपस में बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उस फील को, उस उमंग को महसूस कर सकते हैं कि हजारों लाखों लोग हमसे जुड़े हुए हैं, हमको सुन रहे हैं और कहीं ना कहीं कोई एक सार्थक हस्तक्षेप हो रहा है.
People who came online to view and listen to our incredible speakers from across the world, we were able to continue in our tradition of ensuring the free flow of knowledge and information.